This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Now joining us in studio is Maine Congressman Jared Golden. Welcome back.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Congressman. I know you're a busy person.
We appreciate it. With the White House preparing for potential sit-down between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Russian President Putin, what role should the United States play and what guardrails should guide any security guarantees within a peace framework?
Well, I am first going to state that I'm not ruling out the possibility of a U.S. security guarantee, but I'm not going to rush to say that I think that's a great idea either. It's a pretty big commitment for the United States to make. We have our commitment to NATO countries, which could force us into conflicts. And to offer a security guarantee to any country is a very delicate thing. We're talking about our own young men and women in uniform, our military professionals being potentially put into harm's way to back up that type of a guarantee. So I've noticed some headlines in the last couple of days that the president might be clarifying exactly what he means by a security guarantee. Does that mean American boots on the ground in order to enforce it? Or does it just mean that you're willing to continue to provide military assistance to a country like Ukraine? I think knowing those details really matters to me. Normally, being on the Armed Services Committee, if we were in session in Washington, we would have had opportunities to sit down in a more private setting, perhaps with members of the administration, to get these types of details in greater detail. So I'm not going to weigh in that I think it is a good or bad idea per se, but I feel some hesitancy. But I also think it's not insignificant that Putin has been willing to acknowledge that he might accept a U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine as part of a framework for negotiations and peace.
So while you were on break, are you getting any information from D.C. of what's going on, or are you just seeing it from the news?
I'm seeing what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And look, when your party is not the party that is in the White House, then you're going to get less information than the Republicans are. But when we're not in session, for those of us who are on committees like Armed Services, Intel Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, we don't get briefed on things that would require a SCIF, essentially, right? Security level briefing. You don't just get that briefing anywhere or over the phone. Yeah, there's a greater vacuum right now for myself on these types of questions. So I'm following along just like you all are, and I'm willing to share my thoughts. I have been a supporter of sending military assistance to Ukraine from the very beginning. I don't view Russia as a friendly nation by any means. In fact, I think they are often most antagonistic towards the United States, far more than other competitors that we have out there like China. Russia is very sometimes, thumb in your eye. We know that they do disinformation. They come after us with misinformation online, try and pit our population against ourselves, and many other issues I have with them, including arming the Taliban at points during our involvement there in Afghanistan. But early on, I really was pressing the Biden administration. We need to give Ukraine more sophisticated weaponry, jets, long-range artillery with optics, the ability to reach out and strike with accuracy, allow them to strike targets in Russia, etc. Because I always felt like the briefings I was getting from the generals, I was never some kind of expert. I did 4 years in the Marine Corps infantry, but it always made sense to me that Ukraine was going to have to win early. They have a population kind of demographic disadvantage, and a war of attrition is not in their favor. So it seems to me that as things go on, they are likely to have to settle out of this war rather than risk losing it outright.
You've also consistently backed U.S. military aid to Israel. Do you believe that support should remain unconditional, or is it time to attach more oversight and conditions to America's aid?
I guess I would say that I've never thought that our aid to any country should be unconditional. Israel is an important ally of ours in the Middle East. I say that with my military hat on. And also, as a member of Congress, my diplomatic viewpoint is that they are a functioning Western society on the edge of the Middle East, right there, touching on the Mediterranean. They are strategically very important to us from a geographic perspective, but also important to us from a political cultural perspective. And that being said, if Israel is doing things that are not in our interests or are counter to U.S. security interests, then of course there should be conditions to being in a partnership with any country that's out there. When it comes to like this conflict, I think that the way that it's being covered by the media is unfair, unjust, and extremely biased. The Western media is not going into Gaza. They're being denied access. I actually understand why. We don't need any more people kidnapped by Hamas and held hostage. That just gives them more leverage. But Al Jazeera is like leading the news. And it's like someone saying that I did something terrible because they read it on Breitbart News. Like that is a Republican news source that's maybe not going to be the most reliable source that you can count on. And that's how I feel about the reporting around this conflict. Like what's happening in Gaza is terrible, but this conflict was started by Hamas on October 7th of 23. They did terrible atrocities to women and children and innocent Israelis. They went there specifically to kill people because they were Israeli Jews, although they also killed a lot of other innocent people that were there. I think that they did what they did to stop peace talks that were taking place between Israel and Saudi Arabia, Israel and other Muslim nations in the Middle East. Things were actually moving in a good direction for Israel and their neighbors in the Middle East. And I think that was a threat to Hamas, but also to Iran. And that explains why they chose to start this war when they did. And I also think that the terrible food insecurity, the starvation that we now see starting to show its face amongst the population, that's going to be a big problem in any conflict zone. And certainly I think Israel has an obligation to try and alleviate that. But most of what I am hearing from the ground is that aid is getting into the country and it is either being given by UN agencies by choice to Hamas or they are taking it by force and then they are choosing to sell it rather than alleviate the suffering, the starvation that's taking place among the very people whom they represent as a government. They were elected. From my perspective, they are a designated terrorist organization and not someone I'm ever going to want to see the United States partnering with. But the fact of the matter is they are selling that aid at exorbitant prices, either to rearm themselves or who knows, just out of greed, or they're using it as a recruitment tool to get people to join their military ranks to say, we'll feed your family if you pick up the rifle. So a lot of the reporting makes it sound like Israel is doing this as some kind of tool of oppression or to use hunger as a weapon. And I just don't believe that's the case at all.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Maine Congressman Jared Golden.
So let's pivot over to the lobster industry. I know you've been a big supporter. Corinne and I have a lot of friends who are fishermen. So obviously there's some regulations about the whales. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's been going on for a long time. And no one knows that better than the fishermen. So I think they've been very accommodating through the years. Before my time in federal office, I now understand that they've made a lot of changes to their gear, to their operations, all to try and prevent unnecessary negative interactions with marine mammals, and in particular the right whales. So I think they go above and beyond. Since I got into Congress, it's been a much different environment where I think they feel like they've gone as far as they can go from an economic perspective, that proposed new regs are over the top and too burdensome. So we've really gone into fight back mode here. But a lot of it also has to do with, I think, poor performance from the regulators and an inability to show that there should be any more sacrifice from the fishermen that will deliver positive results for the whales and for that population. I've been disturbed that it seems like the law doesn't clearly state that regulators can account for the economic harm that may be done to a community before making a decision whether or not to increase regulations. So that's something that I've been looking at changing. I actually moved on to the House Natural Resources Committee in this Congress to work on issues for the lobster fishery. I've signed on to a reform bill for the Marine Mammal Protection Act, working with the chairman and his staff. That's Bruce Westerman, Republican chair, and that would make some tweaks to the Marine Mammal Protection Act that in the long run would benefit Maine's lobster fishery, but all fisheries really around the country. But I'm also on that bill and working with them in a bipartisan way because they were willing to put an extension of the pause on new regulations specific to the lobster fishery. We would seek to add another, I think it's 7 years, and that might have been the max that we were allowed to do that under this framework. I hope to be successful. I think we'll pass it out of the House. of representatives in this Congress. We'll see if there are negotiations to try and do something in the Senate, if the majority leader wants to do that. But if not, I still hope that maybe we'll be able to get elements of this bill into an omnibus spending agreement if we ever get one in this Congress, which is an open question. But needless to say, I am trying to position myself to get some more time for the lobster fishery and hopefully also make some changes to the law such that we don't have to keep delaying, but rather can look, in a positive way to a future that feels less threatening to the lobstermen, that is. For the whales, it's always going to be tough. From my perspective, they were practically fished into extinction in the 1800s. It's pretty hard to reverse that devastating of a decline that this particular whale population did, not to mention that they're now facing a lot of climate change issues, warming waters, their food sources are under duress. There's a lot of challenges for the right whales. At the end of the day, my determination is I'm not willing to sacrifice the entire Maine fishery and all those communities' economic well-being and their lifestyle, which goes back so many generations for a lot of those families, to save this endangered whale species. And that's a hard thing to say, and I know it frankly pisses a lot of people off to hear me say it, but that's just the calculation that I've made as the representative of those communities. I formed that opinion over years of learning about it and really thinking about it.
Yeah, I've never seen an industry where a crew of 3 people gets so many regulations.
Well, it's a dangerous job, and they know that. They have made modifications to their fishing gear. They have weak links now manufactured in that will break. If there is an entangled mammal who's big enough and strong enough, it'll break under pressure. That's not an inexpensive fix for the fishermen. They've been putting more traps on a line, which also makes it more dangerous for them. They've been willing to go above and beyond, as I said earlier, and I think that is often missed as part of the conversation. When conservation-minded folks talk about the fishermen, they sometimes make them seem like they're cold-hearted or don't care or greedy, and that's just not been the real story at all.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Maine Congressman Jared Golden. Switching gears to you voted no on the One Big Beautiful Bill, H.R. 1. What elements did you support and what led to your final opposition?
Well, I think a good place to start is by pointing out that no one in the Maine delegation voted for the bill. So I feel like I'm pretty strong footing in understanding that the greater portion of the policies as a whole just weren't going to work out for Maine. But I hate bills like this that are called reconciliation packages. That's something that's only available when you have single party rule in Washington. So you got to have one party in the White House in control of the Senate and in control of the House to successfully do reconciliation. It's not like a requirement. It's just, I think it's been many decades since a reconciliation bill was done in a bipartisan way. They're almost always a partisan exercise. So the Democrats sought to do this in 2021 and 2022, and they did it 3 times, and I opposed 2 out of 3 of them. The American Rescue Plan, Build Back Better, I voted against both of those. In some of those bills, there were things that I thought were good, but as a whole, I thought would be bad either for the nation or for Maine. So I voted no. I ended up supporting the Inflation Reduction Act, again, not a perfect piece of policy, smaller in scale than your average reconciliation bill, but also had some really good healthcare stuff in there and some good, I thought, tax policy adjustments. So I was willing to support that one. The new BBB, I think it's kind of funny that they called it the Big Beautiful Bill. I thought it was a play on Build Back Better, which was the bill that I voted against in late 21. So both called BBB. I think I was hoping early on the Republicans in the Senate were talking about doing 2 separate bills, one that would be border security, national security, maybe some energy stuff mixed in, and then the other one would be just tax policies and maybe what sometimes gets called pay-fors. And I could see myself getting to yes on a package that was focused on energy, on border security, on national security. I could kind of see what was coming on the tax stuff that I wouldn't agree with. Not that I'm opposed to all tax cuts, but I think a full extension of the 2017 tax law wasn't necessary. I think you can extend the middle-class tax cuts and pay for them by letting the top marginal rate revert back to what it was pre-2017. That's been pretty well talked about. And I think extending like that full array of tax breaks, particularly for our wealthiest households, and some of the other tax policies in there that might be nice but aren't necessary comes at the cost of an ability to pay for a package like that. So, this is just a fair assessment of what CBO and others are scoring. The bill is going to add another $3 or $4 trillion to the debt over 10 years. We're already running at unbelievable high numbers, 30 trillion plus range, about $1 trillion per year budget deficit in our discretionary budget in Washington. This is something I've actually spent a lot of time talking about. Maybe we'll spend some time on it at some point on the show, because I think it's a very difficult problem, but increasingly a big problem for the entire nation. So we have bad fiscal policy from my perspective, and a mix and match of some good tax policies and some that aren't completely objectionable. But at the end of the day, when I look at the priorities, it's not more tax cuts for the rich right now. And then my honest read is the healthcare cuts are going to be pretty bad in Maine. About 70% of people in my district are probably coming in the door to get healthcare services using either Medicare or Medicaid. A third of the district is on Medicaid. A large part of that population is absolutely not going to be affected by work requirements. They are the types of people that are on Medicaid that we all believe that's what the program is there for. And at the end of the day, this is absolutely going to end up taking money out of the hospital system and nursing home care system in the district. And if you take what I'm hearing from the hospital folks and nursing home business owners, they think we'll see some closures as a result of these types of cuts in the long run. And in rural Maine, that just gets harder and harder. Access gets more difficult, starts to impact people's access to healthcare, which creates health risks. But also, we had this debate during the Medicaid expansion debates back when Paul LePage was governor, and expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Like, at the end of the day, hospitals are required by law to serve people when they come in the door. It's called uncompensated care. Some people call that charity care. The hospital has to do the service. Ultimately, someone pays, and who pays is all of us who have health insurance coverage in the form of higher premiums. Like, the cost just gets passed off to us anyways. So I always thought it makes sense to try and have as many people covered as possible, try and treat them before their healthcare needs become more and more expensive, and you find long-term savings that way for all of us. These are tough issues.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a discussion with Maine Congressman Jared Golden.
I'm sure you heard that Northern Light can't come to agreement with Anthem. And October 1st, I believe, is when they're going to go to out-of-network. And like you said, it's going to raise premiums on the private insurer to try to make up the Maine Care or the Medicaid that's either not paying from the state of Maine again, or from the government doesn't pay because the state doesn't pay. I think there's roughly 400,000 people on Maine Care, according to an article from the Bangor Daily News just a few months ago. And my question to you is, are we really going to have a cut?
I think we will. And I also think part of the question is, what is the reimbursement rate being set by the state? And that's a prioritization type discussion. I think that the Maine legislature can probably do more if they pick the right priority setting. And there was a time when the state was pretty flush with cash. I can remember telling Democrats in the state house, from my perspective in Congress, when there was a lot of COVID money flowing into the state, you should use this very wisely and maybe use it in more traditional ways instead of trying to do new things or create new state level programming, because I think that this is like one-time money, and you could see all that on the back end becoming a real kind of prioritization battle now when that money goes away. Are we going to preserve brand new programs, or are we going to continue to take care of our bread and butter needs, among which I think is healthcare for our citizens? So I think that the easiest way for me to think about this is to listen to the hospital CEOs, CFOs, same for those running nursing care facilities. I found them to be honest brokers who aren't leaning left or leaning right in their political analysis, but really just saying, this is what's going to happen economically and what it will mean for the state. And I think that they're being honest brokers when they say it's going to hurt.
You recently co-sponsored the SPEED Act, H.R. 4776. Tell us about it.
So the SPEED Act is another partnership bill I have with Republican Representative Bruce Westerman, who's chair of House Natural Resources. I've found it really good to be working with him and his team, and I'm glad I moved on to that committee. Like I said earlier, I moved on to the committee to work on issues that matter to the fishermen here in Maine, but a benefit has been permitting reform. And this is one of two bills that are going to be introduced in the House in this Congress, and they are meant to go together. I won't be on the other bill because I'm not on the relevant committee, which is Energy and Commerce. That bill will be coming from Representative Guthrie's and Peters, and it'll be dealing with energy and transmission and permitting reform to help speed the introduction of new energy into our grid system, whether that be renewable energy or, let's say, like more natural gas pipelines, etc. But our side of the house, Bruce and I are working on NEPA reform, which is like the Environmental Protection Act, and we're really just looking at streamlining the process. We were doing a study of other countries, and it was crazy. The average project to get permitted in America, and I'm talking not just energy projects, but if you want to build a manufacturing facility or almost anything you can imagine, if you want to build a road, average timeline to get through the full permitting process, 5 to 10 years. And then you look at the worst timelines in like Western European nations, maybe 2.5 years. And it's some as good as like Germany was getting it done in like 6 months on average. So you got to come to the conclusion that we can do much better here, and we have to, or else we're going to continue to waste money on inefficient outcomes or just failure, complete failure to build for the future. So NEPA reform will help by doing things like setting timelines on when lawsuits can be brought, tightening that up quite a bit. I think like 120 days after a agency notice goes out about a project, saying that you can't bring a lawsuit unless you engaged in the public commenting period. You can't just show up late in the game and file a lawsuit, and also putting a timeline on how long courts and federal agencies have to complete a permitting process, or else we would just, under this law, deem it approved. I think we put like a 2-year limit on that, which should be a real incentive to the bureaucracy to speed things up and get it right. That's just a few high-level changes. It's a bigger bill than that, but I think I just touched briefly upon some of the areas where I think we'll really see the process sped up if this were to make it to the president's desk and get signed into law. Got to be a part of the commenting period, shortened timeline for when you can decide to try and bring a proposed project to court, speeding up the court's process for getting some kind of adjudication out the door, and essentially telling the government you got 2 years and no longer to get to yes or no on the approval process.
Speaking of energy, what do you think about the EV rebates that are going to expire at the end of September?
Thank you for listening to Part 1 with Maine Congressman Jared Golden. Make sure to tune in tomorrow, Sunday, September 7th at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, the Voice of Maine. You don't want to miss it.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
We want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We just started the podcast about a year ago. We are edging toward 50 episodes. If you'd like to know in advance who our guests will be sure to follow us on Facebook or on X. We do keep it updated with our upcoming guest appearances. And if you have a topic of interest, absolutely reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We appreciate the support. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.